So, Mr. Barr, where were you born?
I was born in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, in Delaware County.
And when did you come out to this area then?
We moved out here when I was about 7 years old.
Your whole family moved out then?
The whole family moved out there. My father saw the area that we lived in sort of growing. There used to be farms around us that we could go and walk over and get eggs and things of that sort. And as he saw this building development, he wanted to be out in the country. And so that he found a farm. We had a farm up in Perkins-Gilmanville, a little one that we went to in the summertime. And that was before we moved out here. And then we did move out here when I was about 7 years old.
And where was your home then?
It was in Upper Darby, on Belfield Avenue.
And when you moved out to this area, was your home up on Strasburg Road?
Yes, it was. That's where it was, and that's where my son now lives.
Okay. And did your sweetheart live next door to you?
That's an example of, we didn't hear him say Strasburg Road, or so maybe you can say just where did you move to when you moved out here?
Where did you move to when you moved out here?
We moved to a farm on Strasburg Road that my father had found, and he really liked, and my mother came out and looked at it and did some remodeling, and after that was done, we all moved out.
Was there a big exodus of people from the city areas out to East Bradford, West Bradford in that time period?
No, not at that time. There were very few people. Most everybody stayed there. But
so most of the people that were out here, were they farmers that already lived here?
Most of the people here were farmers that already lived here. Actually, our farm was farmed by the neighbor's farm when we came out here, and they used to call that sharecropping. And my dad was not a farmer, but he just loved living in the country and loved the farm. So he had Mr. Hoops do all the farming for us.
Is that Pappy Hoops?
That was Pappy Hoops.
Was the farming both agriculture and livestock?
Yes, it was. Basically, the farming in this area at that time was mostly dairy farming. Most all the farms had a small dairy. And Pappy Hoops had a dairy on his farm, and what he would do in the wintertime, he would have the cows over at his barn. In the summertime, he'd move them over to the barn that on our property. So that's how that worked.
And did he also plant corn? And
He planted corn, planted oats, planted wheat, did hay. He planted everything. And we did it all with horses at that time.
No mechanized?
Nope. Well, we had rakes that you pulled, but no machinery that was engine driven. Everything was operated by the horses.
Was some of that equipment that you pulled behind on the horses, was some of that invented in the East Bradford area? I always read about
Well, there were a couple of things that were invented. There was a special rake that, I don't know who invented it, but there was a special rake that was made here. And of course we also had wagon wheels that were made in Westchester in a factory there. And they were used on the hay wagons and things of that sort. So there were a lot of little blacksmith shops that made different equipment at that time.
What about down at Cope's Bridge? Wasn't there some sort of machinery company down there?
Well, you mean the Armstrong Company, or
No, before the Armstrong Company. Wasn't there like E.T. Cope or something that had farming machinery out of there?
Well, not when we moved out here. When we moved out here, there were a couple that owned and had a gas station that was operating right there at Cope's Bridge. So that place that we see when we go across Cope's Bridge, when we get there on the other side on the way to Westchester, that was a gas station and a little grocery store. And that was operated by a person by the name of Hoops also. And we call it Hoops's Garage.
And is that where you went for your groceries?
Just little things we'd pick up there, but we went there for gas, and we went there to get cars fixed and things of that sort.
So is that how you got around mostly with your mode of transportation was cars? You didn't go on the trolley or anything like that?
Well, yeah, we used cars here, but we had no trolley out here, of course. Most of us, you know, if we wanted to go to Westchester, sometimes we ride our bikes into Westchester. And that's the way we got around there. And if we wanted to go in to Philadelphia, we would take the trolley car from Westchester into Philadelphia, and then we'd take the L down from 69th Street all the way down into town. And in those days, you could go down there when you were younger and felt very comfortable getting out of an elevated car and walking up on the streets and walking to where my dad's office was in Philly. You had no problem.
So your dad commuted from out here to Philly every day?
Well, he traveled a lot, but his office was in Philadelphia. So when he wasn't on the road traveling, his office was down in 1011 Chestnut Street.
So after you moved out to Strasburg Road, where did you go to school?
I went to school at the Marshallton Elementary School. Well, actually, it was through 8th grade. And that's where I went to school, and my wife was in that school also.
And then after 8th grade, was it Westchester?
After 8th grade, we all went to Westchester High School. And that was the one that was on Church Street.
So it wasn't Henderson, it was on Church
No,
Street?
it was called Westchester High School at that time. Right on the corner of, actually it was between Washington and Biddle Street on Church Street.
I was wondering how you got your mail when you lived out here when you were younger.
It was delivered by the mailman, but they did have a post office up in Marshallton at one time where everybody had a postal box that they could go up and pick up the mail. And I think most of the people in Marshallton did that. But we had, as far back as I can remember, we had a mailman that delivered our mail.
And what sort of things did you go into Westchester for?
Well, we would go in for clothing, to go into the grocery stores, things that we were not able to get out here. And we would go in for the movies that were in town. And they had a lot of shops in there. We had a big Montgomery Ward's there where you could buy farm equipment and, you know, clothes and a lot of things that you could buy in those stores.
So the only store that you can remember in the East Bradford area is that one right down from Cope's Bridge?
Oh no, we had a grocery store up in Marshallton also. Actually, I guess they had two of them at one time.
So what sort of social activities did you have out in this area without going to Westchester?
Well, we all got together as young children, and as we got older, we played a lot of baseball and softball and went swimming in the Brandywine, and a lot of us would go to Lenape because we loved going there because they had a lot of amusements there. And that was the kind of thing you'd find things to do, is what you would do. And in the wintertime, we would walk from Marshallton down to what we called the Slough, which was a place that we all went ice skating. And we'd play hockey. And the older ones would build a fire, and we'd cook hot dogs and roast marshmallows, and then we'd walk home.
And where was this area for ice skating?
It was down off of
Waltz Road.
yeah,
It's
Waltz Road.
now, but
Yeah. And Telegraph Road. Actually, Telegraph Road went down to Waltz Road, and it was right behind our property and Pappy Hoops's property.
So it wasn't in an area in the Brandywine or a pond or anything like that?
Well, it was part of the Brandywine,
Yeah,
but it
part
was
of
it was kind of an area that kind of opened up, and it was because the water flowed on down from there partly and went into the Brandywine down by Coast Bridge.
So Lenape was a park, an amusement park?
Lenape was an amusement park, and it was a lot of fun, and on a Friday or Saturday night there were loads of people there. And a lot of the churches back in those days would have their picnics at Lenape Park.
Did you have square dances and things like that in the barns?
Oh yes, we did, and we had the best square dance person around, and that was Chris.
Could you start again and say we did have square dances?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
we did have square dances down at Lenape Park, and Chris Sanderson was the one that was the caller, and we all had a great time when he was down there with him.
I can see you have a smile on your face talking about this.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was a lot of fun.
Is that where you met your sweetheart or next door?
Well, I met her up at the school, but basically she was a class ahead of me, so my brother was in her class. So I was a class behind her.
So maybe just start that as how did you meet your wife, and just introduce her a little bit more.
So if we could just go back and give a little bit more of an introduction.
Okay.
Because we said her and nobody would know who her was.
Okay.
So tell us how you met your wife.
You're going back now?
Yeah, if you could go back on that question and just tell us, I met my wife at school.
I met my wife at school, at the Marshallton School, and she went there, as her sisters did later, and my brothers and myself, my sister all went there, and that's when I met her. But she was a grade ahead of me in the school.
Now, you don't need to confine your answers to just what I asked. You can, build on it. I feel like I've made you a little bit uncomfortable and compartmentized you into these
Okay.
questions, and I don't want to do that. So,
Like, I'll just throw in a question, like how old were you then when you first met each other, and what did you first do when you were fun or something?
Well,
Oh, I don't know. I was in like
what was that?
third grade or something.
Yeah, I was in, you were in third? Or no, you were in,
Fourth.
I started third.
You started third. I was in fourth.
I started third grade. Yeah, I was in third grade when we started there.
But I mean, we just knew each other.
Well, let me put it this way. How I got to really know her, and I also knew her cousin, because her cousin was in my class. And through her cousin, I knew who my future wife was, Marjorie. And they were they had two classes in a room. So therefore, there was a time when I was in 5th grade and she was in 6th grade, and we were in the same room, all in the same room. And then she would go on to 7th grade and I'd remain in the other room until I got to 7th grade, and then we were both in the same room again.
I see.
But that's how, I got to know who she was.
Okay.
Now you might want to know how we got to school.
I would love to know how you got to school.
Well, back then you walked. And you walked whether it was snowing or whether it was raining or whatever it was doing. And I can remember many times my brother Harry, who was older, and he and I would start out from the farm, and we would walk right up through where Ann Armstrong lives, and all the way up through the fields in the snow to get to the Marshallton School. And then coming home, a lot of times we'd all walk home on Strasburg Road, and a whole bunch of us would start out, and some people would stop at where they lived and stop where they lived, and usually the last ones that were walking down Strasburg Road were my brother and the Clausers, because they lived below us. So that's how you got to school.
It wasn't Ann Armstrong, it was,
Hmm?
it wasn't to where Ann Armstrong lives.
I said Sue.
Oh, did you?
Okay, that makes
Didn't I say Sue?
Oh,
Said Ann, but I think
thought
you meant
said
Sue.
Ann.
Yeah.
No, I meant Sue. That's who it was, where Sue Armstrong lives now.
Did you know kids who went to the Fairview schoolhouse?
No, we didn't. No.
Okay. I was wondering if farmers in the area got together to work on projects or had meetings like a Grange type thing.
Oh, we had Grange meetings, yes. We had Grange meetings in the one in Northbrook, and we had a Grange, another Grange over off of,
Sconnelltown. Sconnelltown.
what'd you say?
Sconnelltown.
Oh, yes. Scunneltown Road, yeah. There was another Grange off of Scunneltown Road. And that Grange was actually the one that the East Bradford people attended, and the one down here in Northbrook was basically West Bradford.
And were there like monthly meetings over on Sconnelltown?
They had monthly meetings, yep, they had monthly meetings, and they had functions that went on. They'd have peach festivals and strawberry festivals and bingo and things like that, where the community all got together and had, you know, an enjoyable time.
So when did you and your wife get married?
Well, that took quite a while because what happened is when we were in high school in Westchester, the World War II came along, and my father had to move in closer to his office because of gas rationing. Because we had not only gas rationing, we had food rationing, we had food stamps and things of that sort during the war. So he sold the farm and we moved back into Upper Darby. And then I happened to graduate from Upper Darby, not from Westchester. And and this was not too long, they moved in 1942 back in there, and they were back out the farm in 1947. In the meantime, when I graduated from high school, I went right into the service. And because that was a time when you got your diploma and then got called right in. And so while I was in the service, the war was over, and my dad called Mr. Nelms, who he had sold the farm to, and asked him if he had any interest in keeping the farm, and he said no, so my dad bought it back. So I left Upper Darby to go in the service, and when I came out of the service, they were back at the farm, so I was back at the farm. And that's when I got to know her. And at church, the Marshallton Church, I got to get to know her at that point in time, and then we started going out, and we would go out to Embryville. I played baseball, and we'd go out there, and she'd go with me and watch the games, and that's how we got together.
And then did you, after you were married, did you move into East Bradford?
Yes, after we got married, we did move into East Bradford because her family, her father and uncle, owned the Esco Farms, of which one of the houses that they now call the Hill House that Ann Armstrong lives in, we moved in there when we came back from our honeymoon. So we didn't have to move very far. So moving from Strasburg Road down, and my wife lived in Marshallton, and so we didn't have far to go. And we were tickled to death because I was like my dad, I always loved the farm, and that's where I wanted to be. So that's how we got together, and we got into East Bradford.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Esco Farms?
Well, the Esco Farms came about when my father-in-law and his brother had started Esco Cabinet Company, and they sold milking machines and milk coolers and things of that sort. This farm that we live on now was owned by the McAllisters, and it was my wife's aunt that lived here. So they had this farm, and they bought the Hill House farm, and they bought the one, what we call the dairy barn, which is now Glenworth. And so they established a farm basically to test the equipment that they were making in there, the milk, because they had a big Guernsey dairy at the time. So all the equipment that they made in there, they could bring out here and test it before they put it out in the market and see how it worked. So that's how this farms all got together.
And when you say they made it in there, where was in there?
In there was in the old Sharpless building where the Sharpless separator was made. They bought that building back in the late 20s and started manufacturing their milk coolers. Before that, they had been on Franklin Street in Westchester manufacturing. Then they had a place on Market Street for a while, and then they had bought the big building there near where the high school, Henderson High School, is right now. And that's where they made all their milk coolers, and actually made freezers and large walk-in cold rooms and milking machines and quite a bit of things like that.
And did you use the coolers out here for apples that you grew?
Oh yes, as a matter of fact, we still have one of the walk-in cold rooms right over at our barn where we store our apples when we pick them every fall.
So was your apple orchard much larger than this at one point?
The apple orchard, yeah, was a little bit larger at one point. We've lost a lot of trees. A lot of our trees on it right here now are 50, 60 years old. Our son Doug has been planting new trees as we go along, but it's not as large as what it used to be. But when the farm was in operation, they did all of that like we do here. This is sort of a hobby with us. But they did it, and they made, they would have applesauce made and canned back in those days, and cider and things of that sort. So, and they sold a lot of apples too, at that point.
Was the cider and applesauce made on site here, or?
No,
Okay.
no, they took it to a place to have it pressed, and and a place where they could have the applesauce made. We do the same thing now. We pick the apples and grade them and take them on up and have cider made, and we have apple butter and applesauce made.
Was there any, special grafting of apples? Did you have any special apple trees?
Yeah, my wife's uncle and her dad both, they both tried different ways of grafting different apples and came up with a Baldwin grafted with something else, but they had a lot of different apples that a lot of people don't see today. There were Northern Spies that you don't really see anymore, but they had the Red Delicious and Yellow Delicious, but the Baldwins, well, you still see some of them, but not as much. And they had about 12 or 13 different variety of apples.
I was wondering who you might think was the most colorful person in East Bradford when you were growing up or in your early married years.
Squire McConnell was the most, he ran the township. McCardle. Howard McCardle, and we called him the Squire. And the Squire had a lot to do with the Grange and a lot to do with the township, and he was great. I mean, he looked after the township fantastic, and he was a farmer too. And but if we had snowstorms, electrical storms, he'd be out looking to see where problems were, and back then he'd get them taken care of too. But he was very colorful and funny.
Is that why you say he was colorful? Did he tell jokes? Or?
Oh yeah, he told lots of jokes. He told lots of jokes.
Was there like bartering among the farms? Like, did you trade apples to Strodes for their sausage and things like that?
No, we didn't. No, we basically, some other farmers did, yes, in the area. But we didn't. Basically, you grew most everything you need. We had chickens, we had eggs, and so most of the things that you needed, you would grow. So we didn't have to barter at that point.
You have any stories about people who used to live on Lucky Hill Road?
Well, now. Well,
Well, back when you moved, it was dirt road and not many people would
yeah.
Really?
No, but yeah, when we first moved on Lucky Hill Road, actually, and they owned the farms. My wife's father and uncle owned the farms long before that. But when we first moved here in 1949, up there at the Hill House, it was a dirt road all the way down from Strasburg Road all the way down to Allerton. And there weren't very many people living on this road at that point. Most of them were here for quite a while. And they moved on, and the other people bought the properties, and then we had some developments, in the area. But I can't recall anybody that I would say that would be extra colorful.
And maybe you could say your wife's father's name and your wife's uncle's name again.
My wife's father's name was Merle B. Cann, and her uncle's name was Harry Cann. And they both lived up in Marshallton. And actually, later on in life, their houses were right next to each other in Marshallton.
Well, Sally, help me bring out some of these stories because I'm not.
There.
Well, yeah, as far as the town of Marshallton's concerned. Okay, in the town of Marshallton, one of the grocery stores behind the grocery store, they had a shuffleboard, and a lot of the men back then would meet in the evenings and play shuffleboard, and that's no longer there. That happens to be the Four Dogs Tavern right now. And then we had the hall, which was a meeting place, and that is now a residence in Marshallton. And they used to have plays there. I mean, we used to, a bunch of us get together, and we'd have somebody that would get us all together to have like a minstrel show or something of that sort. And we had things like that. And we used to have dances in the hall too, every once in a while. But the buildings are still there, but they're no longer that. And then the Four Dogs is right across from the Marshallton Inn. So those buildings are still there. And across from the Four Dogs, that was one of the old grocery stores. And that building's still there, but it's no longer a grocery store. And that's where the post office was at one time too.
How about as you go down Strasburg Road towards Westchester, do you know the house Peg Scholl used to live in? It has like the TA and the round circle, and her son built a house where in the remains of the barn.
The Park House.
Oh, the
Park House.
Sam Park House.
Do you remember about the Park House? I think there used to be a hat factory there and some things like that. A lot more buildings than there are now at the Sam
Well,
Park House.
when I moved out here originally, the Sam Park House was a big dairy farm. and it was the largest dairy farm right in this area, and that barn foundation had the most modern type of dairy that I can remember back then, and that was a big place, and that's the only ones that I knew at that time that lived there, because they had a son that lived there too. Well, I can go back now because it made me remember that Hoops's garage actually was owned by Sam Park at one time, and so that was before I can remember the garage.
Okay.
But when I remember, it was the Hoops's garage. But that was quite a place. That was quite a farm down there.
It's a beautiful house.
Oh, yes, a beautiful house. And of course, on the other side, going down there, of course, is the Harney property, which Mr. Wagner had when I grew up. And that was a beautiful place too, that they had, and that was a large farm. And actually, that was all, from where I grew up. Pappy Hoop's farm was next. The Wagner's farm was across, and that was all Wagner farm. And then the Clauses that went to school with us lived down over the hill. As you're going down, there's a place that sits way down on the left-hand side, and that's where they lived. And Mr. Clauser, he was actually the chauffeur for Mr. Wagner. And so that was basically it.
Yeah.
And then other people did live there. There's some houses going down there. Miss Breed lived there. She was a school teacher. She lived close to the bridge.
Do you remember the house that John Milner now lives in before he fixed it all up?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. I do remember that house. Yeah, it was a brick house, and it was an old brick house. Yep.
It wasn't in very good shape, was it?
No, it was not. It was not in good shape at all.
My married name's Marjorie Barr. It was Marjorie Cann,
Can.
and I was born in Chester County Hospital in Westchester.
And when your parents brought you home from the hospital, where did they take you to?
The house we lived in up in Marshallton, right in the middle of the town. There are 3 houses down from the firehouse.
So you
On that
didn't have a
side.
long walk to school then?
No, I went right up the alley.
And did you have aunts and uncles that lived down here in East Bradford?
An aunt lived in East Bradford. I think that was all at the time.
Oh, and your uncle came here later then? McAllister? Am I remembering?
No,
Her aunt was born here,
the
and then she married her uncle
She
lived in
married-
Marshallton.
my uncle who lived in Marshallton.
So what was your aunt's name?
Olive McAllister.
And Olive McAllister was born in the house that you live in now.
I think so. I'm not sure of that though.
Okay. And then after she got married, she and her husband lived here.
No, they lived in Marshallton. Her family still lived here.
Her parents lived here. Oh.
Mhm.
Yeah, she was really born here.
Okay. I'm getting lost a little bit in some family history.
I want
Mhm.
to jump into things that are a little bit more everyday life stuff, just to get, like, talking back on some of the things we talked about before, like your earliest memories of school and meeting each other, and
Okay.
And up at the
At
church,
school?
it's not East Bradford.
Can you tell us about your memories of school and when you and Mr. Barr met and at church?
Well, that was when we were in school. We were just in the lower grades because then Doug moved back into Upper Darby, and it wasn't till a good while after that that we met in church, after he was out of the service.
And that was the Marshallton Methodist Church?
Yes,
Marshallton Methodist.
Marshallton Methodist Church.
And tell them how you came to be there, and why you were all there at Marshallton United Methodist Church.
Well,
Yeah.
well, my grandfather had been a minister there years ago, so we just continued to go there. And Doug's family started going there too, so that's how we got together.
And your family goes there today, right?
Oh yeah,
Yep.
our children, our grandchildren, and now the two little great-grandsons
Making the fifth generation.
are
to be
starting.
there.
Well, they were baptized there, you know.
When you were younger, what sort of social activities did you have? Remember the dances and things like that?
We had dances. For a while, we had dances every Friday night down at the Grange Hall. It was called the Grange Hall. We had, and other than that, we did a lot of riding our bikes and playing board games on rainy days. We played a lot of Monopoly when I was growing up.
How about horse riding?
Yeah, we did that too. We rode horses. I had a horse. My sisters, we all rode horses.
You had a lot of sisters, didn't you?
2 sisters.
Oh, two
I had 2 sisters, both younger.
And did you participate in fox hunting in the area?
I never participated in fox hunting, and I don't think either of them did either. They did some horse shows, but Doug did fox hunting,
Yeah, I fox hunted with the Brandywine hounds and Westchester
and
hounds.
then our children, Sally,
Well, they all fox
Doug,
hunted.
all fox hunted.
Were there other social activities that women did? Like, did you meet to quilt or hook rugs or any of that sort of thing?
I didn't.
No?
I don't.
They're taking care of them.
How about like the lampshades? Did you do
My
the
s-
cutting of the lampshades?
My sister did that, and then my daughter learned to do it too, but I never did any of that.
And Mom did. Your mother, Mom can't.
She didn't do the
The lampshades at first.
lampshades.
Yeah, that's how Aunt Mary got into it.
I didn't even know she did it.
Not much, but
Mm-mm.
okay. Aunt Mary. And then she taught me.
So I'm still a little confused on your family then, because your aunt was born here, so that means that your grandmother lived in this house, right?
No, it really
No.
was.
She married Harry Cann.
She married my uncle.
Okay.
The aunt that lived here was my aunt because by marriage she married my uncle.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm trying to bring this
Well,
property
let me
back further.
help you a little bit here.
Mhm.
Okay, this farm and the next farm were both owned by McAllisters, Charles McAllister and George McAllister.
Mm-hmm.
They were all on my wife's aunt's side. That's how the farms all became together by her father and her uncle. They purchased those farms from the McAllisters. Okay?
That's what I'm getting confused. Thank
Oh.
you.
Yeah, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember a lot about the refrigeration business when you were younger?
And no, I don't remember a lot about the business. I remember hearing some about it, and I went into my father's office sometimes, but other than that, I didn't until I married Doug, and then he got involved with it, and then I did.
Then it became a very important part of your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
The one thing they did do, you asked about various things that the girls did and the boys up. But now I never did because we didn't live in Marshallton. We lived below there in the farm. But they did a lot of roller skating up and down the
Oh, on the sidewalk.
on the sidewalks.
Roller skating?
Roller skate, we
Mhm.
did.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And so they had a lot of that. And that was the kind of things they did.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't need a roller rink, you just used the sidewalks.
That's right.
Well, we did when we were younger. Then we used to go to a roller rink over in Avondale.
Avondale.
We'd get together on a Friday night or Saturday, and somebody could drive, would take us to Avondale, and we roller skated a lot. Yeah.
I guess in your day, teenagers didn't have their own cars, did they?
No, not a lot.
Not too many of them. It was unusual if they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
But we did have ones that were a little bit older than us.
Yeah.
Who were, you know,
They
really
would take
nice
us.
with the cart. They did get a bunch of
Yeah.
us in the car, and we'd go
There we are.
here and go there, which made it a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, our parents would take us too. But
Mm-hmm.
but if it was in an area where you could walk to it, you walked. They didn't pick you up and drive you around the corner.
No.
Mose was telling us about a woman down the road, Tacey Carnathan or something like that, who walked into Westchester all the time with her,
Did she?
her
Yes.
boys.
She
yes.
had foster children.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
They went to school with, well, when our oldest son started school, he went to Sconnelltown School, a one-room school.
Hmm.
By the time Sally started, they had built a new East Bradford School. And Doug was going into third grade, and she went into first. But yeah, he had first and second grades at Sconnelltown School. And the school bus didn't come up the road because it was a dirt road. So I had to take them down to the crossroads or take them to school. But then when, even after they started hardening the road, I don't think the bus came then either. It's still, when they did just a part of the road, made it hard, and the rest was still dirt. So we still had to get down to the crossroads to get the bus.
And are the crossroads up here?
Down here at
162, or-
Allerton.
oh,
down
down
at
to
Blue Rock.
Allerton.
yeah.
Yeah, down at Blue Rock Farm.
I've heard of people telling me about stories about auctions down at Blue Rock Farm where they were selling all the furniture and all. Do you remember going to those auctions?
Mm-mm.
No?
No, I don't remember going to
Only
those
one
auctions.
when the farm
Hmm?
sold. Only one.
Mm-mm.
It was way back.
Well, it was-
Yeah, those. I didn't know that.
Anything else that,
Mm. And there was a bus that went into Westchester from Coatesville. On a Friday night, we could go into Westchester on the bus.
so would it come from Coatesville into Marshallton?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd get the bus in Marshallton?
Mm-hmm. And that's how I went to school, mostly in Westchester, on that bus. They didn't have, well, they did have a school bus part of that time too, but I often went on that regular bus from Coatesville that went into Westchester.
Even to get to school?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess there was no real reason like to go over to Sconnelltown for the trolley.
No.
No,
Was there a trolley?
no, we didn't
No.
go this direction at all, hardly.
No, there wasn't any reason for us to
Mm-mm.
do that because it was a much more direct route right straight in Strasburg Road
Yeah.
to Westchester.
Right, right.
I didn't know Lucky Hill Road at all way back then.
Oh, really? It was like a dirt farm road
Yeah.
to you?
Just a
and
dirt,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
do you think that that's the way most people didn't travel across Lucky Hill Road because that's what it was for farmers?
No, there's
I
very
don't
little
know.
traffic. Very little traffic. I mean,
Mm.
most of the traffic on Lucky Hill Road back then were just the farmers
I
along
think
the farm
so.
and the people who lived here.
Mhm.
And you know, and then there would be milk trucks and things like that that picked up the milk but back then you saw very little traffic unless somebody was just out wandering around to see the scenery. But it's much different than today.
And we got all our milk from the dairy barn, came up from the out of the house in milk kettles. Just
Yeah, we had milk delivered from the farms to our house.
From which farm?
From
From the Esco farms.
Esco
that-
Dairy Farm, which is now Glenworth,
Mm-hmm.
and they delivered milk. As a matter of fact, they even at one time bottled milk and delivered milk throughout Marshallton and Northbrook and
we have
quite a
bottles
few
out
places.
somewhere.
Mhm.
So before they bottled milk, did they actually deliver milk to you in those big, tall aluminum cans?
Well, that's
The small kettles.
we had small kettles,
Kettles.
Kettles.
that milk was delivered in, usually like a 2-gallon kettle. And that's how our milk was delivered. But the milk that was picked up by the dairies, like
Highland Dairy.
dairies, was in those big cans you're talking about. And you'd set them out along the road, and they would pick up the milk. And I can remember going back to Pappy Hoop's, because here again, I loved the farming end, and I'd walk over early in the morning and help them milk. And we'd go down his driveway, and he had a little spring house where the milk was kept. And then in the morning, they'd have to, his sons would have to get the milk out and put it on a platform that was at the end of the lane, and the truck would come along and pick up the milk and take it to a Highland Dairy. And that's how we worked things then.
Now, Highland Dairy would be off of Highland Road up in East Bradford.
Well,
That
the-
was a Hoops farm too, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there were Each's dairies also. That was a Hoops farm, yes, Highland Dairy. But their dairy wasn't, their plant was not there. That was the big dairy farm. But the main milk plant around here was the Each's Dairy, which is on 52.
Okay.
52 going outside of Westchester if you're heading
Where
towards
I was
Longwood.
trying to think what's there now.
A shopping
There's a little
center.
shopping
The
center.
shopping center.
Yeah, it
There's a
is.
shopping center
Jamison's
there.
used to
Jamison's and
Yeah.
it's Catherine's restaurant.
eat that used
And
to
and
be East Dairy.
that dairy made homemade ice cream, and it was just mobbed all the time in the summertime, and it was really great.
Mhm.
But that was the main milk pasteurizer dairy around here at that time, and of course Highland also.
Wondering if I want to ask back, so I'm going to pause here. Talk a little bit more at this point.
About what?
About people that you remember in Marshallton, other notable characters or families, friends that you had, anybody who, anything interesting going on to describe? Or yeah, it's tough to conjure up.
No. Oh, goodness.
What about what was in the blacksmith shop before you?
There you go.
Oh, yeah, her dad owned that. So.
Well, not at that time.
What?
Well, yeah, I
No,
guess
the
he
blacksmith
did.
shop when
Yeah.
Mr. Ludwig
There was a
there.
blacksmith that worked there.
That
and
worked there.
People
shoed
brought their horses. They'd bring them up to the blacksmith.
And they made carriages there at the
Uh-huh.
blacksmith shop. And the carriages were upstairs. That's where they were made then. and they bring them out from the upstairs, and so that we did have that kind of a
Yeah.
blacksmith shop at that point that made things like that, and he would make some farm equipment too. I mean, little things that farmers could use, or farmers would go up there and ask him, you know what I need, and he would figure it out and he would make it.
And I guess that would be in the into the 50s and the 60s, or?
That would be into the 50s.
That people still took their horses there till when? Till in the 50s?
In the 50s, yeah.
It's in the 50s.
And then did it get converted over to a shop?
My sister started a gift shop in there, and she made lampshades and sold them. And then Sally, our daughter, learned to make them, and she worked there some for Mary too. And it was a nice antique shop mostly, really.
Was there ever a mayor of Marshallton?
Not that I know of.
No? I'm just trying to think of who's another characters would be
I-
up there, yeah.
Well, there was something else that
I-
might be
I-
interesting for back in those times,
What
and
was
that
that?
was our telephones.
Should we switch the mic? I don't know.
It's not done
I can-
really
Okay.
quickly. I don't know.
What's what?
The telephones,
Telephones?
which
We-
were what they
party
called
lines?
Oh, talk about that. That's interesting.
So,
that would be
so
great.
when you were a teenager, were you on the telephone and somebody else would butt
Oh,
in?
yes.
Tell
Oh,
us
we
about
had
how that worked.
yeah, 3 or 4 people on the line, different ones, you know. Yes, that was, you had to make sure nobody else on there when you went to talk.
So four families?
Well, I think there were as many as 4.
Oh yeah, there would be as many as 4 on the party line.
And did you have to set up deals where one family could use it for 1 hour and another for
No,
another?
I don't remember that, but
Yeah, just how did it work? What was the typical?
Well, basically,
I'm not sure how it did work either, but I know
you would pick up the phone and you'd hear somebody
if
on the
somebody
phone.
was on there, you couldn't use it.
And a lot of times they would hear you pick up the phone, and the party on the other side would say, "Oh, is that you?" on the phone. And say, yeah, well, I'll only be a minute, but stay on, you know. And you'd have a 3-way conversation with who they're talking to, and,
Oh,
and that's the way it
but-
was. And
but-
of course, you had an operator. You went through
Yeah.
an operator.
Yeah.
So
wasn't
every
like
time you
today.
made a call, you called the operator?
Operator.
Call the
Yeah,
operator.
you gave her
That's
the
the way you-
number you wanted, and then
And your phone would ring different rings. Like it would have, maybe your phone would have 4 rings, and
Oh.
mine would have 3,
3.
and somebody's would have 2 short and 1 long, and that's how you knew it was your phone that was ringing.
No songs, huh?
No.
Let's see, what else would be?
she said that's
The
enough.
other thing about Marshallton, Mom, it's kind of interesting that Sonny, who farms here now, his mom grew up not far from Mom, and they knew each other in grade school. Evelyn Hicks,
Oh,
and then only when Evelyn Hagan that was, and then when Sonny came to farm here, she got to see Evelyn again after all those
yes.
years.
Sonny's mother lived right close to us in Marshallton. In grade school, she was, I don't know whether she went all the way through the 8th grade or not, but I know she was there for a while. And then after Sonny started farming here, yeah, I got to see Evelyn again after all those years. That was nice.
She didn't move very far away.
Mm-mm.
No, we haven't gone very far.
No. My father was one of 7 boys and 1 girl. So, and a lot of them were right around here. So yeah, a lot of relatives. But my father was the youngest of the family. So we were a lot younger than our other cousins.
This is the only farm of Esco that still has a family living on it that was from then.
Yeah.
And they still get their electric bill with the address farm number 6, because that's what this.
Oh, that's still
Yeah.
on our, we still get that.
Still on the
What
electric.
does your electric bill say?
Farm number 6.
Farm number 6.
And because there were 6.
Six different farms
Where there's
that they owned together. And that's why this was the number 6. This was the last one down the road.
Well, they owned, my father and my uncle owned a lot of ground on, it's now called Cann Road. And that's because they owned a lot of the ground
On both
on
sides
both
of the road.
sides going down there. Because that was, some of that was part of the farms that they had bought anyway.
Okay.
And so that's how it came to be called Cann Road.
And on part of their property up just behind the 4 Dogs, in the summertime, we held up a truck patch that
Mm-hmm.
Pop up and then Pop Up had it planted. But it was a garden, but a glorified garden. It was a truck patch.
Yeah.
What does a truck patch mean?
You'd have to bring a truck to haul it off.
Well, I don't know what it means. That's where we,
I think you take
they
a
grew
truck
everything.
to load
The
everything.
big garden. When I was a teenager, my father and my uncle built a swimming pool on this farm, and they had somebody, it's a big pool, so they had a woman in Marshallton who was a lifeguard, and they paid her to come down here, and I don't know how often it was or how long her hours were, but for a while, and that the kids in Marshallton came down here and swam.
So this was like a public swim club.
It was
Marshallton Community Pool.
for a while, and then
I guess they would walk down here?
yes, and I walked down here.
Oh, so as a child you would
Mm-hmm.
From Marshallton.
come down and swim?
Yeah. My mother didn't drive, and I had no other way of getting here.
So does the water feel colder to you today than it did then?
Yes,
Because it's fed from the spring house. Right?
That is
The
for
spring
sure.
house fills that pool.
yes.
I'm trying to pull the spring house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell them about this.
Oh, the spring house, because it's,
Yeah.
well, it's still, it was cold then too, but I think I could handle the cold water
Enormous.
better when I was young than I can now.
It warms up after a while.
It's got to be a good while for me before I get in it now.
Okay,
But
but before, when
yeah.
you were younger, tell them what they used to have to do through the summer.
well, we didn't have a filter either, and we had to empty it every
Couple weeks.
after. Yeah, you'd get a lot of algae in it, and it would get pretty bad. So then they had to empty it, fill it up again. They filled it up from the water in the spring house. So
So it didn't get much of a chance to warm.
no, it never did.
I haven't really heard of any swimming pools that are that old.
Well,
When was that? What year roughly?
1938.
1938 it was built.
Finished in 1939.
I think.